Our next topic is pollen pistil interaction. So, students, I have taught this many times how pollen grain and stigma interact, right? So, this is called your pollen pistil interaction, but there are some facts which we should know regarding pollen and pistil interaction. So as you can see, the pollen grains are on the surface of stigma, right? So what happened when pollen grain, when they landed on stigma? Okay, some of the pollen grains are compatible and some of them are not compatible. Okay, compatible means they can fuse, whether they can fuse or they cannot with the stigma, or whether the stigma will accept it or not. So this acceptance and rejection of a pollen grain, it is completely dependent on its compatibility, right? So what happens if the pollen and pistil are not compatible? Okay, then the event takes place is that pollen grain is rejected by the stigma or by the pistil. Then that will prevent the growth of pollen tube. There will be no fertilization. This happens when there is no interaction or when the pollen is rejected. Then in the second one, if they are compatible, then what happens? Then the following event takes place. Firstly, pollen is accepted by the pistil if it is compatible. Secondly, when they accept the pistil, formation of pollen tube will take place. As you can see on the right hand side, I have drawn a tube like structure on a style, inside the style, right? So that is a pollen tube, and that pollen tube, when it grows, it reaches the ovary. I will attach a picture at the last where you will see how it grows. So the pollen tube will grow and it will reaches the ovary, through which the pollen grain will move into the pollen tube. Okay, see, pollen grains, they need some medium to travel or to reach the ovary, right? So pollen tube to help them to reach the ovary. Then when the pollen grains, when they move to the into the pollen tube, then pollen tube enters the ovule through micropyle. I hope you remember the micropyle, right? Then once it enters ovule through micropyle, at the end what happened? Pollen tube, it enters synergid. So I hope you remember the structure of nucleus, the egg apparatus, right? That two synergids are there which have filiform apparatus, right? So that filiform apparatus, they guide pollen grains to the egg for fertilization. So once pollen tube enters synergids through filiform apparatus, then at the last what happen? Fertilization occurs. Here you can see I have attached one diagram. So if you see, a yellow colored tube is there. So that yellow color is your pollen tube. Okay, as you can see that it has entered to the ovule, right? So from there, okay, with the help of pollen tube, the pollen grain, it enters to the ovule. Okay, and this is guided by the filiform apparatus which is present in synergids, and thus the fertilization takes place. I hope that this is clear to you. You can read the diagram. So dear students, this is all for this topic, pollen pistil interaction. So if you find any difficulty, then just let me know. Okay, I'll try to help you out, and yes, do write notes on this and submit it to me in next class. All right, so this is all for today. Take care.